All right, welcome everybody. I assume you can hear the sound of my voice. If you can, maybe you could do something that would signify you could hear the sound of my voice. That typically would be raising a hand or just texting. I can hear the sound of your voice. Don't everybody do it at once. There we go. Just seeing if there's any audience participation. All right, great. So, how to write a competitive offer. That's the subject. And we're going to go through some very specific things. I'm going to show you some ways of maybe coming up with pricing. It's a tough market. Now, you may be wondering, when was the last time I went through this process? And it was about an hour ago, right? Not quite, actually not quite 1 hour ago. And I'm writing an offer with multiple counter offers. We've countered the multiple counter offer. So this is something that we all are living with a little bit. And what we're talking about is that there are multiple offers. And if you've got a buyer, you may be writing an offer multiple times before an offer gets accepted. What we're going to talk about today is what you could do to find out where your buyers are at and to give them advice and to educate them and to how to structure an offer in such a way that it might, be accepted. Excuse me one moment. So some initial thoughts, right? You should see your role as being that of an educator. And by the way, there should be a handout, which is a PDF version of this. If you're having issues, let me know. I'll paste in a link later. But educated and motivated consumers make better decisions. I think that's a true statement. And if you're a salesperson and you take time to educate your clients, the more loyal they're going to be to you, and they also are more likely to move faster. And the faster somebody moves, there's only a limited number of buyers you can work with at any one time effectively. That could vary by agent, but you understand that, let's say you had 5 motivated buyers, that's going to be hard, right? There's only so many days available to show property, especially if they only want to see them on the weekend. It's very difficult. So the longer it takes your buyer to buy something, the fewer buyers you're going to be able to work with. So what we want to do is we want to get them into a house as soon as possible. That's probably an obvious statement. And nationally, right, the average buyer is writing between 8 and 10 offers before they get one accepted. Your market, your mileage may vary. So some things just to consider, like where are they at? What do you know about what's going on in our local real estate market? Where did you get that information from? And I would like to hear what they think is going on. Right now, the people I was talking to sometime recently was saying, well, we think is going on is that it's, the market is overpriced and that there's going to be a bubble and the bubble's going to pop and all of that sort of stuff. And so, where did you get that from? Oh, well, we saw, something on the internet. And so you want to find out what they're thinking, right? And we're going to talk about what the answer would be to something like that. So you want to be able to educate and inform people. Let me show you the reality of what's actually happening in our local market. Now, some of the numbers that you might want to know is what are our inventory levels, months of inventory. The months of inventory is an old school way of determining how is it a buyer's market or a seller's market. And you're going to find on the internet that they say that you ought to have 6 months of inventory in order for it to be a normal market. I've been in real estate a long time, and in Silicon Valley, where I'm speaking to you from, we rarely have had 6 months of inventory. Even you'd have to go back to the 2008, 2009, and even then it didn't last that long. But for us, I would say a balanced market is when you have 3 or 4 months of inventory, but we're not even anywhere there. How many listings have been added in the last 30 days? What are the number of sales, what is the average sales price, and then what is the sales to list price ratio. Now, what I've done recently, like a few minutes ago, is I ran in the statistics program for the MLS, and I only included some of the counties, the big counties that are in my area, but you might want to do this for wherever you are. So this is a combination of Alameda, San Mateo, Santa Clara County, and you can see the sale to list price ratio in February of 2022 was 114.1%. So among those three big counties, on average, the sellers were getting over 14% above the listing price. Now, when it comes time to make an offer in a particular market, we're going to want to drill down a little bit more. And by the way, the 14%, I've seen that in several of our other markets. And the average days to sell was 17. That's average. If I ran that report looking for median, it's a lot less than that, because there's some homes that have been on the market for years, and that would just that throws the average off. So that number, and again, if my client was interested, let's say my client was interested in I'm going to just delete a few of them. So let's say my client was only interested in Santa Clara County. Let's just see how much of a difference that is. Santa Clara County, and look at the data, and it's 113, right? So it's about 14% over. If my client was looking to buy in San Jose, I would run it for San Jose. But that idea that in the Bay Area, the sellers are getting 14% over what they listed for. So that's a number that you ought to know, the sales to list price ratio. Because when it comes time to making an offer, right, and we're going to want to drill down a little bit in that number, because that's an average, but it gives us an idea that we're not going to be offering list price necessarily. And then the other thing, and when I had this conversation recently, one of the things that I heard from one of the buyers was, the bubble, there's going to be a bubble, all that sort of stuff. The projections for price increases by the end of 2022 are anywhere from 5 to about 12%. Now, I have a subscription to Keeping Current Matters. If you don't, you could still go to their website. Another interesting indicator: are there any contingent properties? Or are they active or pending? Yes, that's another indicator. What is the ratio of active and contingent and pending? I guess that's that's another. There are a lot of ways to analyze the market, but one thing you need to know is what is the list to sales price ratio for the area your buyers are interested in. Is it 14%? Is it 10%? What is it, right? Number two, you need to expect that they might have heard that there was a bubble about to burst. And what are the projections, right? Now, this is from Keeping Current Matters. I have a subscription, which means if you follow me on Facebook or LinkedIn or Twitter, you probably see these. You could go and read them yourself from Keeping Current Matters. And what the discussion is about, which is down here, is that what at best is being predicted is that there could be a deceleration of the price increases, not a depreciation of price increases. Nobody that is credible really is forecasting that prices are going to drop in 2022 or 23. Nobody that's really credible is predicting that right now. What we're seeing, and even these are being revised because the market seems to ignore the predictions of the economists and other experts that the market is going to slow down, it's ignoring that because the market doesn't appear to be slowing down, right? Price increases keep going up. And in fact, what you might also want to do is when you're looking at statistics, is what is the listings by price range, months of inventory. This is an interesting, let me just do that while we're looking at that months of inventory, right? Remember, it was a 6 for the 6 months of inventory. In February 2022, there was 1 month of inventory among Santa Clara County, less than a month. And if we look at prices over time, and we could calculate the average, which I'm not going to do right now, but obviously if prices are going up, if we want to look at a chart, yeah, you can see what's happening. They're not going down. So you need to know those numbers, because when you're talking to a client and they say, like somebody said to me an hour ago, there's going to be a bubble, the bubble's going to pop, prices are going to drop, maybe we should wait, right? And there's 2 reasons why that's not a great strategy. Number one, nobody credible is saying that prices are going to drop, right? That's not a prediction. And number 2, interest rates are probably going to rise. So why is the market so strong right now? Is it interest rate? Is it millennials? Is it both? 78 million, there are 78 million millennials, 31% of the population. Boomers were 27% of the population at a peak. 70% say they want to buy a home in the next 3 years. That would add 50 million plus buyers to the market. Zillow research showed that half of the home buyers in 2021 were under the age of 41. And the median age of a home buyer last year was 36, millennials. And according to CoreLogic Loan Application Database, this is a fantastic read. I keep a copy of it next to my bed at night in case I have insomnia. 67% of first-time home purchases last year were by millennials. 84% of millennials say it's a good financial investment. So this is what I said to the client today, right, who was talking about, well, there's going to be a bubble, the bubble's got to pop, maybe we should wait. And I said, well, I've been in real estate a long time. I admitted this to him. And I was in real estate in the 2008 and 2009 market. I was in real estate in the 2002, 2003, the dot-com bust. And what was going on in 2008 and 2009 is not what's going on right now. We had the kinds of loans, anybody could get a loan, right? If you could fog a mirror, you could get a loan. They were doing stated income loans, liar loans. They weren't verifying they weren't looking at tax returns. They weren't verifying your income. You would write down whatever number you wanted to, and they would go ahead and give you a loan. What could go wrong with that? They're not making loans like that anymore, right? They're not making loans like that, hardly ever. So we're not doing that. The underwriting guidelines are far more strict. The other thing is that what would make it a bubble is if for some reason demand were to drop off. Now, if you accept that there's a huge number of millennials and they're approaching home buying peak, notice 70% in the next 3 years. This is what I said to him. Imagine a pig being swallowed by a python, right? You see that great big bulge, moving down anyhow, sorry about the metaphor, but that's what's going on. That pig is moving through nothing personal millennials, moving through that python. And what that means is because they're breeding, right? The millennials are breeding, they're forming households, and that's what's creating the demand. It is not an artificial demand, right? We do not have enough houses to satisfy all the millennials. So unless something catastrophic happens to the economy, The market is not going to just burst like it did in 2008 and 2009. There was 100% financing back then. It was crazy. Trust me, I know it was crazy. So the question is, this is what I said to them, and their price range is up to about 2 million. I said, the question is, what if you wait, prices are going to go up, right? And the prices go, and they've already noticed that in the area they're looking, prices have gone up from the last sale, 150,000 over the last sale of a similar property, right? And we're talking about in a few months, it's gone up that much. So let's say you're in the $2 million price range and prices go up 10%, which is really not that hard for California. That's $200,000 more you'd have to pay for the same house. The other issue is that if interest rates go up 1 point, it's going to reduce your buying power by 10%. And the way the language I use is this. What that means is that the mortgage payment that today would buy you that $2 million house, when interest rates go up 1 point, that same mortgage payment will buy you a $1.8 million house. So you have lost, this is the important words, you would have lost $200,000 in equity. If you wait, interest rates go up 1 point, you're going to lose $200,000 in equity. But then also when you consider that prices might have got up 10%, your 1.8 is what today is maybe a 1.6. Now, if those numbers are really high for your area, cut them in half, right? If somebody wants to buy $1 million house and interest rates go up 1%, this is the words that usually get their attention. The same mortgage payment that today would buy you a $1 million house after a 1% rise will buy you a $900,000 house, same mortgage payment, but you've lost $100,000 in equity, right? This is what is at risk if you wait, right? This is why people are buying now. So, and of course, this is about supply and demand. So you know, I'm sure you understand how that works. If supply is high and demand is low, prices, you know, might go down. If it's the reverse, if demand is high but supply is low, prices go up. Where are we now? And obviously, you know, I do this in asking them questions so that they say, well, we're in a high demand, low supply market, right? Notice I put in this line, you may have to sell them on the market and maybe sell them on you. And if you're good at educating people, then that's going to help you, right? They may believe in you because you're educating them. Discuss the competitive market. You need to make sure they understand that we're going to be competing with other agents. One of the people I heard, she was complaining because there were multiple offers, and she had chatted with the listing agent, and the listing agent didn't tell her there were multiple offers. And so she was angry that the listing agent didn't reveal that there were multiple offers. Now, first of all, we're going to get down to calling the listing agent and what would you ask? I would ask. But number two, and I typed this someplace, assume there are multiple offers. If this house has been on the market for 3 weeks or less, I would assume there are multiple offers, right? So we're in competition with other buyers. Do you understand this? So let's talk about a strategy in order to win. You do want to win, don't you? Now, one of the lines that I've traditionally asked buyers is, are you serious about buying a home? Would you say you're serious? Right? Are you serious about doing this? And when they say, yes, we're serious, great. Well, then let's discuss a strategy for being able to buy a home in the market like we're in today. By the way, one of my prospecting lines would be, has anybody ever met with you and discussed how to buy a home in a competitive market like we're in today? Do you have a strategy? Because in the market we're in today, you're going to need a strategy to buy a home. And maybe we could discuss what that strategy might be. And then that is setting up the appointment where we can talk about this. So I had this, Stephanie has a kind of the same convo yesterday. They were adamant about the war and uncertainty, keeping rates low and not going up and possibly dropping values, thoughts on touting rising rates and rates of current economic global situation. Yeah, rates went down a little bit after they had gone up a point, right? Rates went down a little bit. So you kind of have to become something of a, somebody who follows economics. Is there inflation right now? Is there inflation? And the answer is, well, yeah. And even all the stuff that's going on in Ukraine, some of that might increase inflation. And so what effect that can have, and is it possible that it's going to have a short-term effect on demand? Perhaps. People that are using stocks to buy property, the stock market is going up and down, right? And so some of the people have lost some of the money they were going to use because the stock market has dropped. But if inflation continues, then there's going to be pressure on the feds to do something about it. And generally what that means is rising interest rates. And although it went down a little bit, then they're likely to go up in the long term. And we could look at predictions, but predicting that is sort of hard given that market. We don't know. Inflation keeps going, interest rates will rise. What's going on right now may not stop that. So just some general things. And in fact, you might say if you were a homeowner and you were selling your homes and there were 10 or more offers, what would make it stand out to you? If you were selling a house and you got 10 offers, what would you be looking for as to which one you would accept, right? And they'll say, well, price, right? They might say terms, right? But, we want them to speak the words about how we need to compete. Have to act fast. I've had clients that were kind of sort of interested in buying a home, and by the time they would tell me we want to see this one, it was being sold, right? Minimal or no contingencies, we're going to talk about that. Depending upon where you are, we may have to offer 7 to 15% above asking. Again, I would have showed them that. And if the market is 14% over list price, then we may need to be looking at homes 14% below what you're qualified for. Because if we're planning on anticipating a over list price offer, we can't be, if their maximum is 1 million, then you're showing them 1 million and people are generally getting 14% more, you're never going to buy anything. So understanding you're not going to get everything that you want, what are the two absolutes that must haves? Right? Because, we're not in a market where you may get everything you want. And I would let them know that we may still need to write 2 to 3. It might be more than that, but I didn't want to say 23. 2 to 3 or more offers before we get one accepted. We want them to have the appropriate expectations. And what that means is there's probably going to be competition. We're going to have to offer more than list price. We're going to have to make the offer as strong as possible. And even then, we may not get each one. Knowing what we've discussed, do you still want to buy a house? Are you still serious about buying a house? And if they say, yes, we understand, we get it. But you may need to explain to them the interest rates versus the millennial demand. That's not going away, right? You understand? There aren't enough houses for all of them. So let's talk about competition. Now, oftentimes you might think that competition means having the highest price, and sometimes it does. There's a really old metaphor. It's actually a real story, but there was a guy, well, it's an old story, that he was at the time, one of the most famous American jockeys, right? Horse racing jockeys, and had won this series of horse races. And so he was being interviewed, and the interviewer asked him, what do you attribute your great success to? I mean, you just won these three, tournament, what do you attribute it to? And his deadpan answer was, I rode fast horses. That's how you become a winning jockey. So to some degree, our role in this is we're just the jockey. You understand? We're just the jockey. And you can whip the horse only so much, right? In other words, if your horse is too slow, you're going to have difficulty, right? You're going to have to go into a different race. And so the competition, please make the PDF available for download. It is available for download. Those of you who are looking for the PDF in the GoToWebinar control panel, there is in fact a PDF. And if you, for some reason, that's not working, at no additional charge, and I didn't do it, I didn't click on it. How about this? Copy link, now done. For no additional charge, I'm going to post in the direct link to the Google Doc, right? How does that sound, right? But it's there. All right, so doing all these things that I'm going to talk about is not going to guarantee you're going to get the house, right? It's not going to guarantee it. There's your horse may not be fast enough to win some weight races. There was another metaphor that was, this is also a real story, but there were these two golfers and somebody had tracked them, and during 1 year, the two of them played at essentially the same tournaments. But one golfer made 10 times more than the other golfer. One golfer had won about $1 million in prizes, and the other one about $100,000 in prizes. When they analyzed the difference in how the golfers were performing, what it broke down to was 1/4 of a stroke a hole. That's all it broke down to. But you understand that 1/4 of a stroke repeated over, hole after 18 holes, tournament after tournament, one person was making 10 times as much as the other. So this is not a guarantee if you do it. I've got clients right now that are having difficulty buying a house, right? If I knew the magic words that would make this work, I probably wouldn't be talking to you guys right now because I'd be rich, because I know the magic words. But by doing these things, we can increase, you'll be picking up 1/4 of a stroke here, 1/4 of a stroke there. Right? And it may reduce the number of offers that you write. So most people think it's about price. It can be about price. And the question is your offer over asking? Are you asking for stuff? Right? I still see buyers, and I have agents that I work with who say, well, the buyer wants the seller to do the termite work before escrow closes. Really? Really, I want to be a size 36 waist, and but that's probably not going to happen either, right? You understand now, if the buyer is willing to only look at homes that have been on the market 4 weeks or longer, well, then they can do whatever they want, right? They could ask for concessions, they could ask for credits, they can do stuff. But if this came on the market 3 or 4 days ago, the open houses look like anthills, you're not going to get concessions. And then I get asked a lot, sometimes by buyers and sometimes by agents, what about an escalation clause? Now, for those of you that aren't familiar, an escalation clause is a clause that says we're offering 1.2, we'll offer $1,000 more up to 1.25. Right, so we'll offer $1,000 more than whatever anybody else has offered, but with a maximum of 1.25 or whatever. I actually had a buyer, I did sell him a house in Mountain View, which is a competitive market, let's just say. And what he wanted was to have an escalation clause that said he would raise the price by $500. And now this was like almost a $1.3 million purchase. And I was like, $500 isn't a lot, but he thought, well, that would still motivate the seller. This is the problem with an escalation clause. First of all, a lot of times sellers think you're just trying to use some trickery, and they don't like it, and they react negatively, because if you're offering 1.1, but you say we'll go up to 1.15, but that's why didn't you just offer that in the first place? And by the way, this is not a new thing. Escalation clauses, they were being used a lot in the 1990s. Don't ask how I know that, but let's just assume I know that. And so what we would do, if I have a listing and you wrote an offer and it had an escalation clause in it that said we're willing to offer $1,000 more than any other offer up to 1.2, and that 1.2 is the highest bid, right? That was higher than anybody else's. I'm just going to counter you at 1.2 and remove your escalation clause. I'm just going to counter it. And what are you going to do? You've already told me you would take 1.2. What are you going to do when we come back and we counter you at 1.2? The other issue with escalation clauses is, how do you know what the other offers were? They said, well, people can show you the first page or whatever. What about contingencies? What about financing? There are a lot of other issues. I have not seen, and I have never seen escalation clauses work effectively, right? I don't see that, particularly in this market. I don't see that. And I also see listing agents putting in the private remarks, no escalation clauses, please. And then they're adamant about, please make, what is there a separate form for an escalation clause? Escalation clauses are not a good idea. So I'm not going to teach you how to do it. I think that having one would hurt your ability to buy the house. And you're going to see one of the things that I talk about is, how are you representing yourself as an agent to the other side? And if the listing agent and the seller don't like you because of the way you're behaving, right? Because of the things that you're doing, and you irritate them, chances are you're not buying the house, right? And if they counter, they may not counter you. I've done classes on this. The CAR has stuff on it. I am not going to, they have sample clauses. They don't work. Let's say you took a class. Have you ever taken a class in negotiation? If you've ever taken a class in negotiation, did the negotiation training say, start out your negotiation by telling the other side how high you'd be willing to go? Do you think any negotiation training has ever recommended that? So like if I'm in a market and I see a stall and they're selling apples, and I say to the vendor, how much are your apples? And he says, well, how much would you pay for an apple? And I'm like, cool, we're going to barter. That sounds like fun. I just want you to know I'm not going over $1, right? $1 is my max. Okay, let's negotiate 50 cents, 65. He's going to come back and say, how about $1? Right? So I'm not going to show you how to do an escalation clause. I'm telling you, a lot of listing agents don't like them. A lot of sellers don't like them. They think you're doing something sneaky, and they simply are going to say, well, if they'll go to 1.2, why don't they just offer 1.2? Right? And if the listing agent knows what they're doing and your top of your escalation is in fact the highest, often they'll counter you at that number. They will take out your escalation clause. They don't have to show you any other offers, and you'll be stuck in the take it or leave it position. Right? I'm just not going to, that's my opinion, right? My humble opinion about escalation clause. Closing timeline. Does the seller need to stay after escrow closes? How would you know? Call the listing agent and ask. Now, some listing agents will put that information in the private remarks, or they'll put it in a cover sheet in the disclosures, assuming you're in a market where agents are giving you all the disclosures. I would ask the listing agent, what you want to do is to write an offer that the seller would be able to accept without having to counter you. And so when I call the other agent, I say, is there anything special, anything, special that your seller wants, that they're looking for, tell me. And you're going to see one of the concessions you can make as a buyer is something to do with giving the seller more time to leave. Is it vacant, right? If it's vacant, and they would want to close quickly. If it's not vacant and they're buying another house, and they might actually need time, right? So rather than just saying we can close quickly, find out, do they want to close quickly, right? Well, we could take 30 days. Well, maybe it's vacant and they would rather do it in 21. You understand, if I'm the listing agent and this is the seller, we get two offers and they're the same amount, and one of them is too long or too short of the closing time and the other one is just perfect, we might just take it. Now, if you're thinking, well, won't they counter? They don't always counter, right? They have no obligation to counter. And many times the seller's going to say, let's just take this one. Let's get it done. I'm tired of this. Let's go on. So EMD, emergency medical dispatch, your earnest money deposit. The higher, the better. Now, in California, if it's a 1 to 4 units owner occupied residential property, the maximum amount that a seller could keep should the buyer breach the contract is 3%, which is why we typically put in 3%, because that's the most they could keep. But if I'm a seller, I might like it that the buyer is putting in more than 3%, 5 or 6 or 7. Now, even though I know that if the buyer breaches the contract, I can only keep 3, the mere fact that the buyer is willing to put more money in shows a seriousness. It also makes it harder for the buyer to back out, because you don't get your money back necessarily immediately. You gotta, ask the seller to sign the release and all that. When does the EMD go into escrow? And if you want your offer to stand out, write in the next business day. See, I also work with agents and buyers that want to make multiple offers on properties. They want to offer on 3 or even more. And that, because, hey, the seller gets multiple offers, why can't I make multiple offers? Now, the way in which somebody would structure this is, and it's always the one they want most is not the first one, where the first due date. So on Tuesday, we make an offer on one house. On Wednesday, we're making an offer on the one they really want. But they'll take the one on Tuesday if they can't get the one on Wednesday. So how do we make that work? Because we may not know till Thursday as to whether or not they're accepting the one we offered on Wednesday. How do we make that work? And the answer is, you don't put your money into escrow. And if you leave it as a default, it says 3 business days. And if it's coming up to a weekend, it rolls over to Monday. So you just don't put your money into escrow, because there's not much they can do to you on the Tuesday offer you made if you don't put the money into escrow. But by Thursday, you hear that your Wednesday offer was accepted. Then you're telling the agent, the listing agent, on the Tuesday offer, you've decided, your client has decided not to go through with the deal. That's why, by the way, as a listing agent, I don't change the status from active to pending or contingent until the earnest money deposit is in escrow, because until the EMD goes into escrow, the buyer can essentially walk. Now, I know I heard the lawyer say they could potentially sue you. The residential purchase contract says under damages that should the buyer breach the contract, this is what it says: the damages are the deposit actually paid. That's what it says, the deposit actually paid. If no deposit is paid, then there is very difficult to get damages. So if I tell the listing agent and the seller, you accept our offer, and the next day our money is going in, that gives them the message that we're not shopping around, right? We're not still looking. You're the one, right? You're the one we want, right? I was going to make I'm just not going to say that. Right? You're the one. What about inspections? Now, depending on where you are, right, you may have a totally different experience about this. I'm in Silicon Valley and in Santa Clara County, in southern Alameda County, but not northern Alameda County, and San Mateo County, 90% of the listings have disclosures, inspections, and reports. Most of them do. And so in my market, it is very common that the seller already has a termite inspection, a property inspection, a roof inspection. If there's a pool, there's a pool inspection. They already have all those things. Can I repeat the meaning of EMD? Earnest money deposit. EMD means earnest money deposit. It's the number you write in right at the top, right? When you're filling out, earnest money deposit. You're going to see listing agents, there's nothing wrong with not knowing that. I have a lot of new agents who have called me up because they're reading the private remarks from the listing agent, and it says POF, EMD, POF, and they're like, what are they talking about? Earnest money deposit, and POF, of course, is proof of funds. If the seller has given you a termite, a property, a roof, a chimney, a pool, given you all those inspections and reports, the reason they're doing it is because they're expecting a non-contingent offer on inspections. That's what they're expecting. Now, you don't want your buyers to buy homes they don't want, and you want them to be comfortable. So I look at those inspections and reports, and what I'm looking for is there any call out for a further inspection? Like, that's one of the big things I look for in a property inspection. Does the property inspector make a reference to the foundation and suggest that you get a foundation inspection, or to the plumbing and you get a plumbing inspection, or to the electrical panel, and do they recommend an electric? So I want to see if there are any of those kinds of statements in the property inspection. And by the way, I wasn't going to log into this, but I guess I'm going to. In the California Association of Realtors, and I've had a couple of people try this, and they said, it's about as good as you would expect. If you go to transactions and you scroll down, you see porch, get reliable cost estimates fast for every home inspection report, and customized repair list for your clients. Discount for CAR members, right? I'm not saying that their numbers are perfect, but if you're looking for an estimate, and by the way, if you Google search, what does it cost to replace an electrical panel, you'll probably find something out. So if the seller has inspections and reports, and there isn't anything mentioned in them where you would want to get another inspection or report, they're expecting a non-contingent offer on inspections, right? What I'm seeing happening in Silicon Valley, because down in Southern California, they still don't do all the inspections and reports. It's not as common. Up here, 90% of the time we do it. Down there, maybe 10% of the time. My team goes that far south. So if they have those, they're expecting a non-contingent offer. If they don't have a termite, a property, and a roof, then that means that the seller isn't expecting a non-contingent offer. You understand? So you can have an inspection contingencies, and these are the different levels of an inspection contingency. Number one, you could say 10 business days or 2 weeks or something like that. Make it short, right? If you, that's the first step of the ladder. The second step on the ladder is to make it even shorter, to say 5 business days, right? So what that would mean is that you would need to know that you can get inspectors out there to inspect it in 5 days, right? Because then it's, it'll be over. Or next level of inspection contingency is 5 days for information purposes only. Right? Did you know that in the residential purchase agreement where it talks about inspections, there's 2 things. One is inspection as a contingency, which simply says we can back out if we don't like it. The other one is just information purposes. And actually, I don't need to do this one, right? But if it's information purposes only, yeah, I'm going to do it. That one was not necessary. That was, don't know why I put that there. And of course, the one that is more likely to win is if there's inspections and reports, no contingency. Now, if they don't have a termite inspection and they don't have a property inspection, it is not my recommendation that the buyer buy without any inspection contingency unless the buyer is like a contractor or somebody who is a fix and flipper, somebody who is not just an amateur. And by the way, I've had buyers who have contractors, and when we went and looked at the property, they brought their contractor with them in order to do an inspection. Occupancy. Well, what we're talking about now is escrow is closed and the seller wants to stay. How long? As you may know, right, that lenders generally allow a maximum of 60 days. What about rent? And in fact, I also could have, how about the security deposit? I had that coming up today too. So how much time, again, if you called and talked to the listing agent, how much time do they need? Rent free, most of them, if there's competitive, you understand, this is what I say to my clients, which is easy for me to say. It's just money, right? Yes, I know you have a mortgage payment and you're gonna have, but it's just money being factored into the purchase. And if this is multiple offers and it's competitive, not charging them would be, make your offer more palatable. And then should there be a security deposit? Some sellers, it's safer to have a security deposit held in escrow until they leave. That is safer. However, there are still some sellers who think, well, why, what do you mean a security? We're not going to break the, we've lived here for 20 years. We've made it look beautiful. We're not doing it. But again, that would be released to them. How do you work homeowners insurance in a rent back? So they can't have two homeowners policies. The easiest thing to do is for the buyer to contact the buyer's insurance. Either buyer or seller could do this. Both buyer and seller have a homeowner insurance policy. One is in effect, the seller's, and the other one is going to be in effect. Most of these companies, if the buyer calls up their homeowner insurance company and they say, look, for the first 2 months, the seller is going to be renting back, is that okay? What do we need to do? And they have a rider that they can make it a tenant policy for those 2 months, right? Or the seller, when their homeowner policy ends, they could get a policy for the next 2 months as a renter's policy. Right, so either of them can do it. The insurance companies they do this all the time. If you call the insurance agent up and you say, hey, tell them what's going on, this is not a new thing, they'll sell you a policy that covers the rental. Max is 60 days per lending requirements. That's true for most lenders. The most is 60 days. Otherwise, they don't consider it to be owner occupied. And if it isn't owner occupied, the rates and terms change, and not for the better. So the one we're doing right now, the mortgage payment is like $8,000 a month, and the seller wants 2 months. Ow, right? Ow. Well, would you prefer to have the seller pay you rent but offer $20,000 more? You understand that they're just going to be factoring that into the price. So appraisal. If you have none, and by appraisal I mean contingency. All right, I guess I could have typed that in, right? But contingency. Do you have one or don't you? Now, if you do have one, it is safer. If you do have one and anybody makes an offer higher than yours without an appraisal contingency, they're likely going to get it. I see in my market sellers going with the highest non-contingent offer. So if your client has cash and sufficient that they can make up the difference, that looks better. I closed a few months ago on a $4 million transaction where my buyer had 50% down. Now, if I'm the listing agent, I know that anybody with that much of a down payment isn't going to be having difficulty if it doesn't appraise right on the number, because it won't really affect the loan at all, right? So now I don't know if I should say this. The inspection contingency. Let's say you're not in Silicon Valley. You're listening to me. You're in San Diego, you're in Los Angeles, and you're writing an offer, and the listing agent and seller have not given you a termite or property inspection. They haven't given you any of the inspections. And you have an inspection contingency. And that inspection contingency lasts long enough that you would probably have seen the appraisal by the time you have to remove the inspection contingency. Now, if you don't have an inspection contingency, you're not supposed to back out based on, if you don't have an appraisal contingency, that's not supposed to be the reason that you're backing out because it didn't appraise. But the inspection contingency, this is the wording in the residential purchase agreement, the CAR contract. This is the precise wording when it talks about inspection contingency. It says, and I quote, buyer's acceptance of the condition of the property and any other matter affecting the property is a contingency of this agreement. And then there's a period. Now, you don't say, well, it didn't appraise, so we're not going to buy the house, because that's not acting in good faith. You don't have an appraisal contingency. But there's school rankings, there's crime statistics, there's other reasons that if you were motivated, you could think of why your buyer doesn't want to buy the house. So if you have an inspection contingency, sometimes, I'm just saying, sometimes, I'm not saying this is a good thing or not, right? I'm just saying sometimes people will write offers without appraisal or loan, even though they kind of need them, because they still have this big open-ended contingency. Now, if you're a listing agent down in Southern California and you're hearing me, you may now be understanding why in Silicon Valley, which is an intense market, people already give the termite, the property, and all those inspections to the buyer so that it can be a non-contingent offer. See what I'm saying? Right? So, yeah, you may need it to appraise, but if you have an inspection contingency, you might find something, we drove by the house at night and the neighborhood was noisy and it seemed crowded and it was loud and we didn't like the people we saw, so we decided we don't want to buy the house. Right? Something like that. So again, if you've got an appraisal contingency and somebody else is offering even less, they're probably going to get it, because especially if the listing agent thinks that there may be appraisal as an issue. Right now, I haven't been noticing a lot of appraisal issues. What about your financing? Do you have pre-approval? Who did it? If the lender is a locally known lender, right, your chances of this helping you is much better. So as a listing agent, I seek pre-approval letters. Right? And I was helping one of the people I'm mentoring. We had three offers, and the first one, the loan agent and the buyer's agent were the same person. The buyer's agent wrote their own pre-approval letter because they worked at an office that do loans. Now, I'm just telling you that if I'm the listing agent, we're pushing that offer to the side, because my experience has been that if the buyer's agent is doing the loan, they'll kill the deal. They'll lie on the approval letter because they want to get a commission, right? They'll try and put it all together at some other point. That's not good. The next offer, the pre-approval letter, was from some internet lender. They had obviously printed it off a website that had a cartoon character on it saying that they were pre-approved. right? And not even like a real signature. All right, right. The third offer was a local Bank of America loan agent who I actually know and have known for a long time. And Bank of America's pre-approval letter was 3 pages long, listing exceptions and things like that. I called the loan agent up, and after we did the, obligatory, how have you been a long time? Oh, glad to see you're still alive and in the business, that sort of a discussion. I asked him about his pre-approval letter, and while talking to me, he's pulling it up and saying, oh, wow, yeah, I've made loans with this guy before. He has enough cash, he could just buy it if he wanted to. This is solid, right? So a lot of you know I like to work with Jody Hatano at Golden One Credit Union. Credit unions and banks look better, I'm just from my opinion, to an agent, a listing agent and a seller than some other mortgage companies where you've never heard of before, particularly internet ones. Quicken Loans and things like that have a terrible reputation. And the reason they do among real estate agents is because they rarely close on time and they disappear and they don't return phone calls and they don't answer. So it's not just that your client should have a pre-approval letter. It matters who wrote the pre-approval letter. It matters. And you can tell whether or not and one of the things I like is that the loan agents that I use, including if they have verified the assets to close, will actually say that in the pre-approval letter. We have verified that they have the seasoned money necessary for the down payment and the closing costs. Right? So they're not all equal. And if you let your buyer pick the lender, in that they're going to we found a lender on the internet and they're charging 1/8% less interest than anyone else we found, and we printed off the letter, so let's go with that. You just need to understand you're at a disadvantage when you're competing against other buyers that have pre-approval letters from companies the listing agent has heard of, right? And has a human being that the listing agent could call and ask them about it. And in fact, it would be good if your loan agent would send an email or call the listing agent saying, hey, I'm the loan agent on this. I just want you to know that these people are solid. If you have any questions about them, give me a call, right? Because what is it that a seller really wants? I mean, yeah, they want a high price and they want all what sellers and listing agents really, really want is that once it's in escrow, it stays in escrow and it closes. Now you say, well, if the buyer backs out and the buyer doesn't get financing, then they could lose the deposit. It's not that simple, right? Losing your deposit is not an automatic forfeiture. The listing agent and the seller would have to fight for it if the buyer wasn't willing to just give it up, and they're never willing to just give it up, right? They're not going to do it. They'd have to hire a lawyer. They'd have to go to arbitration. They can't sell the house while you're fighting over the deposit. What they want is for it to close. And so why would a property not close? 2 reasons why escrow would not close. Number one, the buyer's financing falls apart. It's one reason. And number two, arguing about repairs, this is how I sell sellers on getting a termite in a property, so that we're not arguing in the middle of escrow about what needs to be fixed or what credit ought to be given or any of that stuff. Because when we have multiple offers, the seller has a lot of power, but once you're in escrow and those other buyers have moved on and you don't want to start over again, putting it back on the market and doing open houses and doing all that, the seller is in a much weaker position. So the more they're convinced that you really have financing, it's pre-underwritten, right? If you have a bigger down payment. Now, there are ways of doing this, by the way, where you can get a home equity line, do an 80-10-10, so it looks, right? It looks like you've got a 20% down loan, but you may not. I closed one last year. Jody from Golden One was the loan agent. And the offer, this was in San Jose, this is a competitive market. There were multiple offers. The loan approval letter said 80% loan. But in reality, in addition to the 80% loan, there was a 10% second, which was a home equity line on the property being bought, which gave 10%. It was an 80-10-10. But of the 10%, half of that was gift funds from a relative. My buyer actually had 5% of their own money in escrow, but the pre-approval letter looked like they had 20 because they had an 80% loan. Yeah, they closed. So you understand, having a good lender who knows how to do these things could make your I only have a little bit down buyer able to buy something because it looks a little bit better. That's a whole nother long discussion. A home that comes back on the market always faces a stigma. Yet people are wondering what's wrong. Sale of property contingency. If you've got one, you've got problems. If your offer says I have to sell my house before I buy your house, that will work if the house has been on the market 90 days. I guess I need to speed this up a little bit, but we may go a little long. I don't know. It's not going to work as well, especially if it's a competitive. These are the questions. Have you listed it yet? If the answer is no, we haven't even put it on the market, but we want to make it contingent, that's the worst. Is it in escrow? That's better. Is it in escrow and the contingencies are removed? That's even better. If it's in escrow and the contingencies are removed and we're closing next week, that could be doable. But your client may need to understand that if they need to sell a house, to buy a house, they need to sell the house first, even if it means they're renting someplace. Home warranty, why not just waive it? Right, well, I know we're only talking 600, 500, depending on where you are. Sometimes sellers don't. Why are they asking me? I've had people arguing about who's going to pay for the home warranty. We're talking about a $1.4 million property, and they're arguing about a $600,000, right? $600 for a home warranty. A letter to the seller. I don't really like these. This is to pull on their heartstrings, but then there are fair housing issues. Many of the big companies don't want agents to do it. In fact, this is a copy from EXP's Policies and Procedures from the state of California. Now, what it says, and by the way, I also know that Coldwell Bankers and Minnie Keller Williams and others have very similar policies, but at first there's the warning. And then it says, when representing a buyer, do not include a seller love letter that has photographs or personal information. That's what they all have. Listing agents are not to receive buyer interest letters. If an interest letter comes in anyway, the listing agent should tell the seller that we got it, but we are not showing it to you. There is greater liability on the listing agent and the seller's side than the buyer's side. And notice that they point out that the real estate commissioner holds real estate agents to a very high standard. And if you if they perceive that you are violating fair housing laws, you're in trouble with the Department of Real Estate. One of my clients, she's selling a house, she's bought a house, she wrote a love letter. I didn't represent her on the purchase. She did that. She has a real estate license. But anyhow, I didn't represent her. And she was bragging about how she wrote this letter to a seller in Santa Rosa, and her offer was accepted, and it wasn't the highest offer. And she was like, see, they work. And I pointed out to her that that scenario is what could cause people to get into trouble. And what I mean is that, let's say she's not a member of a protected class, but let's say one of the other buyers who wrote an offer was a member of a protected class, and later finds out that the property was sold to someone else who had a lower offer, and that someone else was not a member of a, you understand the opportunity to meet lawyers as a result of this, right? Do you understand? What kind of agent are you? Are you easy to work with? Are you a pain in the ass to them when you talk to the listing agent? If the listing agent gives you instructions, do you follow them? Do you come off as being chaotic? And you know, have you, if the agent says, this is what I want you to do, and you don't do those things, you understand you're giving them the impression that maybe they don't want to work with you. Right? Do you have everything? Proof of funds? Is your pre-approval letter good? Is it up to date? Are you a good communicator? Now you might say, well, if my offer is the highest, they're going to take it. They might have 5 offers that are near the top, and they're going to pick 3 or so that they're going to counter, and you may not be included you may not be included. Hard conversations. Do I have to offer? Show them what's happening in the market. What if I want to sell first? That's a whole nother discussion. But you're going to have to explain to them in a competitive market, you're not going to get anything. I want the seller to pay for stuff. They're not going to do it if there's multiple offers and it's a competitive market. I don't want to pay more than it's appraised for. This is what I told my clients today. So their concern is if they offer what they want to offer, they're overpaying. Right? Now, what I explained to them is the moment your escrow closes, you've become the comparable for that neighborhood. And the next person that's going to put their home on the market is going to price it based upon your closing price. So even if you're paying more than you think it's worth, or even more than the current appraiser thinks it's worth, as soon as you've closed, the bar has been raised, and appraisers are going to be using your comparable in the future. It's not like you've lost money. It's not, right? The bar raises. I want the keys at closing. Yes, I understand you're excited. I'm excited too. But we want, in order to write an offer that's competitive, seller has to pay rent. Again, it's about money. Other thoughts, always assume there's multiple offers. You could pay as a buyer for some of the seller's closing costs. Sometimes people like that just because looks like a freebie. Your offer should be clean. Clean means without a lot of contingencies and without you writing in a bunch of poetry in a bunch of different places. You should be easy to work with. Change the mindset about buyers overpaying. The discussion I just went through, that once your transaction closes, it raises the bar, it raises the appraisals for the neighborhood, is what I would do. If we close, and this is what I would say to a listing agent, if we are close but not quite there, will you please send me a counteroffer? Let me see, in regards to letters, is it so clear, DRE, as buyer's agent, can I get into trouble? Yes, you can get into trouble. It's just that oftentimes you can get into trouble because if you don't do buyer interest letters, but if you give the seller and the listing agent a letter that identifies some characteristics of your buyer that cause them to be picked, and it involved protected classes and things like that, you also could be in trouble. It's remote. I thought you could ask. Yes, we would ask the listing agent. Always assume before I write. Sometimes listing agents don't return your phone call. Sometimes listing agents don't communicate back because everybody's calling them. You can't talk to them, right? And so if you can't talk to them and confirm that there's multiple offers, assume there are multiple offers. This is what I asked my client today, because she had said, well, is no seller love letter EXP company wide? I don't know about that. I'm just doing California. And they don't say no if you represent a buyer, but you have to remove anything that would be personal about it, which is what most of them are all about anyhow. This is what I asked my client, because she said, well, this is the number you were wanting to offer. And I said, great. Let me ask you this. If somebody offers $20,000 more and they get it instead of you, are you good with that? No, is what she said. Oh, okay. So maybe that isn't your highest price. Would you want to know if somebody offered $30,000 more? Would you want to know? Because you'd be, yes. Well, then think about, maybe we ought to do that now. So that question. So if somebody bought it instead of you, and they offer 10,000. I'm dealing with big numbers in my thing. Are you okay with that? And they say, no, we'd be willing to do that. Well, then you haven't made your best offer. And the advice I gave my client, and I don't know if we're going to get it, I don't know, is that if you really want this house, make the best offer that you can afford to make, right? Because this isn't the first time we've written an offer. And then afterwards, if you don't get it, this is a question to ask the listing agent. Because sometimes the listing, well, somebody offered $100,000 more than anyone else. And then the buyer say, oh, well, they're crazy. We would never have done that. All right, now some of this, things to do in making an offer, I'm going to go through quickly, but things to consider: how long has it been on the market? There been a lot of showing, a lot of open house activity, condition of the property, how much over asking? I actually put together a spreadsheet for this. What do the automated evaluation models say? And you want to really look at what's going on in that market. You should talk to the listing agents. Do you have any offers? Are you willing to look at preemptive offers? How many offers do you expect? Sometimes they know because they know how many disclosure packages are out. And the line I use is, how many agents like me have called you and said they're going to write an offer? And then they'll say, well, I've had 5 people call and say they're going to write an offer. Right? Do you have a price expected? I had a guy the other day tell me what number he said, we already have 5 offers and you're going to need to start with a 2, right, if you want to buy this house. And I said, cool, thank you. My client didn't want to buy that house. Any other terms the seller wants? The other thing, this is important and sometimes overlooked, look at the pending sales in the area. Pending sales. And then what you want to do is reach out to those agents for a couple of reasons. Number one, that pending sale may become a comparable for your appraisal. So if you know that there's a similar property in the neighborhood that's in escrow that's going to close in 10 days, and the listing agent says, oh, this is what we got, right? Then you now know, because if that closes before your appraisal, you now have a comp, right? You now have a comparable that shows a much higher number than the ones that have already closed. And although pending agents, once the contingencies have been removed, right, it's not contingent, but it's actually pending. And you call, this is what I have an email, a text message, I call them and I say, hi, my name is we're writing an offer on a property in your neighborhood. We see that your listing is about to close. I'm just, your property is going to be a comparable for our appraisal. Would you be willing to share with me how many offers did you get? Where are you at? And a lot of times agents will just tell me. They don't all, but sometimes they will tell. Now we have more up-to-date information about what's going on in the market. We know something. Download and share your disclosures. Do they have inspections? Look for recommendations. I already sort of covered that. What will it cost? Do your agent visual inspection disclosure so that when you submit your offer, there isn't anything missing that they're going to have to ask you for, right? Preferably, you've done everything they've asked. You might want to summarize your offer in an email, right? Sometimes they use a system for doing it and it's already summarized, but you might summarize it. The RPA or version would mean they're actually done by addendums now. I wrote this a little while ago, which means that instead of the probate being a separate one, include a contingency removal form, proof of funds if the loan letter doesn't already say that, no love letters. If they have a disclosure package, sign everything, get it all done in advance. You want to look good to the listing agent like you know what you're doing. That was going a little bit fast there at the end. Any questions? I'm willing to go. This is obviously a subject that could go on for a while. There's no guarantee, but I don't know. I'm not seeing any questions. This would be your chance. No burning desires. All right. I hope you found that interesting. I have found explaining millennials and the demand. This isn't a bubble. where there's just inflated demand. There aren't enough houses for them. There aren't enough houses. The demand is not going away, right? It's not dying off. It's not going away. Interest rates will probably go up. Waiting is not a good idea. It's not going to get better now, right? Now, and they have to be committed to the process and be willing to write the most competitive offer they can write. All right, guys. Well, thank you very much. I went on a little bit long, but that's just the way it is sometimes. I hope you all had fun. I certainly enjoyed it. If you, by the way, there will be on my YouTube channel the recording. As some of you know, I'm with eXp Realty. I have a large team. I mentor and coach agents. If you are interested in getting some help with your real estate business doing better, reach out to me. There's a link where you can set up a time to talk. I'd love to talk to you. Anyhow, have a great day. Stay safe out there, everybody. Bye now.